To understand the Eidsvold class, you have to understand a bit of Norwegian history. Norway hadn't had the best of luck at being an independent country, as Denmark-Norway, it had gotten involved in the Napoleonic Wars on the French side, and after a short war with Sweden, on the British side, ended up having to cede Norway to Sweden, albeit that the two nations were theoretically separate, except for a common monarch and Sweden deciding on all foreign policy. By the time we reached the other end of the 19th century, however, there was a growing appetite for Norway to make its own way in the world, which would culminate in full independence in 1905, since the Storting, the Norwegian parliament, held relatively broad powers. They began to order a series of coastal defence ships, starting with the Tordenskjold class in the early part of the 1890s, and then capping off the century by ordering two larger vessels, the Eidsvold class. Compared to the earlier ships, the Eidsvolds offered a significant jump in capability. Whilst the overall armament was almost identical to the preceding class on paper, there were key differences. Both had a pair of single 210mm or 8.2-inch guns, but the Eidsvolds used a new pattern. Both had 6 single secondary guns, but the Eidsvolds used 150mm or 5.9-inch guns, the older class using 120mm or 4.7-inch weapons. The tertiary battery used the same 12-pounder or 3-inch guns, but the Eidsvolds had 8 instead of 6. Both classes had a pair of single 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes, and the final bit of armament was 4 single 3-pounder or 47mm weapons, whilst the older class used 6 single 1-pounder weapons. The larger differences lay in armour and power plant. Both classes used vertical triple expansion engines, but the Eidsvolds used water tube boilers instead of fire tube boilers, with 2 smaller funnels instead of 1 large one, making the Eidsvold slightly faster and considerably more fuel efficient. The newer ships also used Krupp armour instead of Harvey armour, which meant that although belt armour dropped from 7 inches to 6 inches maximum thickness, the overall level of protection was actually increased. 2 ships were built, Eidsvold and Norge, laid down in 1899, launched in 1900 and commissioned in 1901. If this seems fast for a capital ship, remember they were quite small, displacing just over 4,000 tons soaking wet, and just under 3,700 tons when in normal loaded conditions. 4,500 horsepower saw the ships able to move at around 17 knots when new, although this would drop to just over 15 knots towards the end of their careers. Due to their armour and firepower, they were well able to stand up to contemporary protected cruisers, although they'd be at somewhat of a disadvantage against the bigger armoured cruisers and actual battleships. Their primary anti-torpedo defence was the smaller guns, as ships of this period did not tend to have much, if any, torpedo defence systems built in, something which would come back to haunt them later. They would form the core of the Norwegian Navy, with the plan being to supersede them in this role with the further improved Bjørgvin class, but these were under construction in the early 1910s in the UK and unsurprisingly got drafted into the Royal Navy with the outbreak of World War I. With various modifications to these ships to turn them into monitors, making them unsuitable for Norway's docks, the Eidsvolds remained the largest and most powerful units of the Norwegian Navy through World War I and the interwar period, and into World War II. They did not, however, receive any major modifications or upgrades. 2 small refits in 1927 and 1939 added a number of anti-aircraft guns, but that was really about it. As tensions escalated in the early part of World War II, both ships were moved to Narvik to guard against any attempted landings, British or German. In the event, it was German destroyers that would loom up out of utterly foul weather at point-blank range and demand that the Norwegian ships surrender. This was refused, but the blizzards meant that although technically close enough to support each other, neither ship could hear or see their sister, as a result of which Eidsvold was torpedoed alone, the lack of underwater protection seeing her magazines detonate as she moved to engage the German vessels. And a short time later, Norge was likewise dispatched by torpedo after a short gunnery duel with the German ships, who'd by this point moved in to begin their landings.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.